For the third file, our last one left us with Yuka being given the choice of a long journey south with a strange and powerful company. This next file takes us to the next day and what she did next. Yuka could feel the tears held back behind her father's eyes as they stood before the icy shore. The black sea next to them roved and swayed with the morning tide. Flecks of fiery orange were reflected in the surf, hailing the morning star teasing the horizon. Her father looked to the budding spear of light, almost jealously. You're a woman now. Your world is your own. I cannot stop you. His kind, weather-beaten face turned to look at her. In my heart, I know that I need not worry. You've all the strength and cunning that your mother had, and more. But his voice trailed off for a moment. Well, when I made this journey to help guide you to the black shore, I did not expect to be going home without you. Yuka nodded, feeling a part of her heart being tugged painfully in the direction of her father and home. Her father coughed once more, then looked back at the sea. But who am I to hold you back from this great adventure? He reached out and took Yuka in his arms. They were the arms of a man who had spent a lifetime hammering tin and copper into bronze and now held her tight. She returned the embrace with as much strength as she could, with her arms still sore from the day before. Sing my name to the wind every now and again, Yuka. The green spirit will carry it to the copper shards, and I shall know that my daughter is well. Yuka felt a single tear escape her eyes. She nodded into his shoulder. I will, Papa. He let her go, and nodded to where the rowers that made up Aglu's crew were gathering supplies on the dock. Away with you, my blood-haired legend. You may have ridden a god into the dead sky, but I expect Aglu will still want you to help her crew make ready. Yuka smiled and slung her pack over her shoulder. Oh! Her father put a hand on her shoulder and reached for something in his climbing pack. Your mother would spring up from the ground and drag me down if I did not give you this. He held up a length of wood, banded in copper, thick as a tree branch, and about the length of a grown woman's arm. At its head was a small but heavy axe head, made of the best bronze forged from the copper shards of home. The metal gleamed in the growing sunlight. Yuka gazed. Mother's fury. Yuka took the weapon and weighed it in her hand. At the top of the axe, where the bronze was set into the wood, was a small fleck of precious forest jade. It was a blessed tool, and one that Yuka's mother had always taken with her when venturing far from her green temple. Her heart swelled, and she kissed her father's cheek. The old bronze smith smiled and winked at her. My hope is that you will not need it, but best carry your mother with you in the fight. Now hurry up and get yourself to sea, daughter. Yuka smiled, slipped the axe into the arm loops of her pack, and embraced her father once more before making quickly for the dock. Damn, girl! I thought you were about to sleep through the commencement. Aglu called out over her crew, loading provisions onto one of her vessels. Yuka looked at the 3 large floating umyaks, floating in the morning tide of the small ice harbor. An umyak, it was much like the smaller wooden boats that Yuka's tribe used to transport goods and themselves through the mountain and rivers of the cliffs. The difference, other than being much larger, was that these vessels were made entirely of lurker skin and bone, save for the wooden benches inside. The malleable black skin was dried and oiled to be stretched to the limit around the thick gray bones. The vessels looked to Yuka like massive pointed tree trunks that had been cut in half, lengthwise down the middle. Each umyak could hold 10 or more people through choppy waters, and yet when landfall was made, each could be flipped upside down and carried across the land by a mere 5 men at minimum. They were fast, danced over rough waters, and lighter than any vessel that Yuka knew about. Aglu's crew manned this fleet of 3, and were the power of the most lucrative water routes in the western grasp. Yuka smiled at her aunt. And miss the chance to ride the black with the sea bear of the west? Never. Well, get your pack aboard and make yourself useful. Eimik is adding a fresh coat of bile to the bow of the center boat. Yuka nodded and ran to the middle vessel her aunt had nodded towards. Yuka reached the edge of the boat. She brought her pack over the side and onto the boat with her left hand. The edge of the vessel came up to just below her chest, which was still partially out of the water. It was rising and falling in slow, steady increments as the vessel danced with the morning tide. She tried to brace herself, grabbing the edge and hurling her weight over. The first attempt failed, with her almost falling back onto the ice. The second ended with her slipping on the ice and slamming her chest into the hard bone rail of the vessel. By the deep mother, ask for help before you break yourself. Yuka looked up to see a boy that looked to be a year or two younger than her. He had shaggy black hair that hung over his eyes, a large, protruding nose, and a wide smile of crooked teeth. He wore a wide coat of soiled lurker skin, lined with jaka fur, and held together with bone toggles. So you're the one that all the fishers and bone grinders were talking about over the breakfast pot. The young man looked Yuka over. She looked hard back at him. I am a woman who was blessed with her kanken by the Light Rider herself. Are you going to help me or just stare? The young man smiled bemusedly and reached a hand out. Yuka took it. No offense meant, the boy said as he helped her over the side slowly. You've just been the talk around every kuluk in the village. Yuka did not know how to answer that. She merely grunted in reply and righted herself onto one of the wooden slats that made up the lower skeleton of the vessel. I am to help you coat the forward end with bile. Eimik's eyebrows raised. Oh, well then you can help me carry the pot then. He jerked his head in the direction of the steaming clay pot of foul-smelling amber bile. Here, you take the right end, and I the left. He pointed to the small handle at the end of the pot. Both went on either end of the pot and lifted. Eimik grunted as he heaved the heavy pot as they struggled forward. As they reached the bow of the vessel, the two of them heaved the clay pot onto the horizontal plank of wood at the tip of the vessel. This plank, Yuka knew due to Aglu's instruction, would usually be the place reserved for the boat's spotter. Eimik took a step back for a moment and leaned against the bone rail behind him. Yuka could see him grimace in pain. The young boy reached down and lifted his leg. The limb moved and bent in a manner that Yuka had never seen. The boy must have seen her staring. He smiled and lifted his trouser pant leg slightly, showing carved wood beneath. Halfway down the boy's knee, his leg was made of chiseled duskwood. 4 years ago, one of the great gods of the Deep Mother saw fit to take a bit of me down to the dark feast below. He answered the question that had been asked by Yuka's eyes. Yuka felt a small bit of shame for having stared at the boy's deficiency. At the thought of who took his leg, the same chill she had felt in the water yesterday morning crept into her belly. How deep were you? No deeper than the surface, sitting in my kayak, but it was night. Yuka looked at the younger boy incredulously. What foolishness brought you on the black at night? Eimik shrugged and handed Yuka a thick brush made from the bone and jaka tail hair. He brought a second one out from his pocket for him. I was looking for my brother in the icebergs, around our village's shore. He was late setting the nets for the morning fish. The Deep Mother saw fit to take him whole. He gave Yuka a rueful grin. And where's your village? Yuka spoke as they began to paint the bile over the nose and front end of the ship. We're at a small fishing village, in the crag of the Grasp, that's farthest west. Ours is part of the Horn tribe of the Coves. Yuka's eyebrows raised. Your Horn tribe? And you sail with my aunt? The boy, though young, had a look of stone as he glanced back at the marked woman before him. His eyes were slate gray, with strange flecks of amber and hazel. Flame behind the stone, Yuka thought to herself. Water Chief Aglu found me before that war, and she does not care where I am from. The boy dipped his brush into the stinking, steaming pile and began slathering heavy doses on the outside of the umyak. Yuka did not ask the boy more about where he was from. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small length of jaka antler velvet to tie her hair back from any possible splash from the bile. In the last few seasons, she had let her thick red locks grow long enough to hang nearly halfway down her back. She loved the feel of the cliff winds roaring through it, but the hassle of avoiding getting things stuck in it was infuriating. The copper rings in her hair clinked as she tied it. When she looked up again, she caught the boy staring at her. What? Your aunt speaks about you, all the time. She says your hair was touched by a song of the red wind. A demon. Yuka turned to look at the boy again, dipping her brush back into the vial. What's a cove boy know of the red winds? Eimik shrugged again. My grandfather was cliff-born. Yuka spread the vial from her brush out over the tanned lurker flesh that made up the outside of the boat. Feeling parched, she reached for a skin of water stowed inside her pack. My mother was a greenwress. I was told that when I was a child, she took me up to a high tower mountain that was near the forest, out of our village. There she was attacked by a fierce red spirit on the wind that lived up there. When she came down from the mountain, my hair grew this color. The young boy's eyes grew a little wider with every word, though he looked to be trying not to show his interest. He continued lathering bile on the outside of the boat, with his eyes locked onto her. You're cursed, then? It was Yuka's turn to shrug. She tucked at a forelock of her hair. I don't remember it. Mothers of the green spirit do their best to keep their children from the flames and the red demons on the wind. My mother always said that curse or blessing to take what I am. The boy nodded, unblinking. His fascination felt a little unnerving. Yuka offered out her water skin to the boy. He took it, murmuring his thanks. It hasn't meant much for me this far. I have no great blessings or spiritual powers that I know of, Yuka said. You did ride a god yesterday morning, Eimik said, after a long drink. God rider or no, I'll throw you both in the black if either of you let that bile harden in the cold. Yuka turned to see a man whose mother must have been a gnarled winter tree. He stood high on the bone ribs of the boat. His thin, sinewy body blotted out the sun coming up to the north horizon. His hair hung longer than anyone Yuka had ever met, well past the middle of his back. Every inch of him was wrapped in salt-worn black lurker skin, tanned and supple. His eyes held the color of dead embers. Yuka had seen this man in her aunt's crew many times, but had never spoken to him. Aglu's black wind, she thought to herself. Yuka, who had faced a god the day before and danced with, had sat still and fearful of the man before her. He glanced at her with dark eyes and a weathered face once, but turned his gaze back to the boy. Eimik, if you want your sea chief to appear to her guests that she is a lazy crew, continue what you're doing. Otherwise, lift that worthless leg of yours, and your wooden one, and get the bile back to the hold. Eimik grimaced and nodded. Yes, Takani. He lifted the pot, not looking at Yuka, and hurried, limping and wobbling with the tide, back down the boat. Alone with the man now, he turned back towards Yuka. You'll be Siku Sprout, then. Yuka nodded, swallowing her apprehension. I am a god rider. I am a woman marked with her kankin by the light rider. She said these words to herself over and over in her mind. Aglu speaks of great promise in you. He tilted his head. But I take little stock in promise. Action will show me the worth of you. He began to turn. We'll be watching you close, girl. Woman, Yuka called out, standing. She suppressed the fierce unease she felt in her heart. I am a marked woman, respected by all who follow the ways of black or green. You would be wise to. Takani turned back so swiftly, Yuka almost fell back. You're Aglu's blood, and at her word I row, and I fight to the black heart of the sea herself. But you'll need more than a legend to earn my bow, girl. With that, the oak of a man marched carefully down the bone ribs of the boat to the other end of the vessel. Yuka watched him go. As the man leapt lightly over the side of the boat, she saw the women that were meant to join them on the voyage advancing from the village beyond the shore. Keeping away from the wavering tip of the boat, Yuka struggled back to the shore side of the umyak. As she stood, she could make out the faces behind the jaka fern-lined hoods of those who approached, though there was no mistaking the towering Aglu amidst the others. As they neared the shore, Aglu threw back her head and gave a high, arching yell to pierce the morning wind. All the women marching for the boat raised their hands and spears into the air, answering the call with a yell of their own. Takani led all the oarsmen around him in reaching for their thick-carved oars, and they beat the blade ends against their muscular chests in reply. The sky take you, lazy dregs! Hurry now and mount the sea, riders. We break for the great bosom of the deep mother soon. Yuka's aunt called out. A great cheer met her words. As they neared, Yuka could make out the other women accompanying her aunt. Nanak and the Light Rider were among these. The blue-garbed nomad woman, Nanak, walked with 6 other spearwomen wearing similar garb as her. Every one of them wore scars and stony expressions on their face. The Light Rider had 4 of her salt brood among her. 2 of the Salt Sisters with her looked to be as ancient as her. The other 2 looked to be only a few years older than Yuka. The great old woman of the Black Shores carried a great struggling bird in her hand. It was enormous, with huge black wings, a wicked sharp beak, and fiercely thick talons. The Light Rider held it by its long neck and one of its wings in her vice-like grip. The small woman was the first to reach the boat. One of her Salt Sisters and one of Nanak's fighting women helped lift the older woman over the side with a struggling charge. "Come with me, God Rider," the old woman whispered as she righted herself on the boat. Yuka followed the woman back to the end of the bow. The Light Rider stepped up to the spotter's plank at the tip of the vessel. Yuka stood close behind her. "We feed the black. Black, bless our oars. Mother, bless this journey through death from the sky." The Light Rider sang these words out over the black, icy surf. Yuka thought of those words, death from the sky. There was a slitting, tearing sound, and the great sea-bird in the Light Rider's hands gave one last great jolting struggle in the woman's arms, then went limp. The sharp, coppery smell of fresh blood masked the scent of the drying lurker bile. Yuka wrinkled her nose as the wind brought flecks of blood to freckle her face. The old woman held up a small, serrated bone knife and dropped the bird into the water. The twitching animal floated for a moment before the black current took it below. "May our voyage be blessed," the Light Rider turned to call out to the rest of the boat. Another cheer met her words, and Aglu began barking orders for all to mount the 3 boats. As she neared the umyak that Yuka stood upon, Yuka saw her speaking hurriedly to Tikani. "You fear that one," the Light Rider said to Yuka as she stepped off the stool, nodding towards Tikani. The girl stood straight and shook her head. I have faced a god swimming in the deep mother's breast. I fear no man," the old woman chuckled at her words. "I have heard stories about that one. I would not be so sure he is a man." Yuka opened her mouth to respond, but caught her words as the Light Rider grabbed her arm. "You did well yesterday, child, but do not think that you are done earning your legend. Use this journey to find yourself and to show all what more you can do." She squeezed the girl's wrist and made her way back towards the boat. "Oh there, my little myth. Are you volunteering as spotter, then?" Aglu's great frame shook the boat side to side as she sidestepped the Light Rider to get to Yuka. Yuka frowned. "What does a spotter do?" Aglu looked to be thinking hard. "Well, spotting, I guess." She barked out a laugh. "Now Takani there commands the best oarsmen in Yokehead, but the strength of those men is nothing without the guiding of the wise. I usually trust the task to my boy Eimik there. He has better eyes than any of my crew. He knows what to look for, and I'm sure he won't mind an apprentice." Aglu seemed to notice the grimace on Yuka's face at these words. Yuka was a woman grown, and she was to be apprenticed to this crippled boy. Aglu made her way down the boat and leaned close, bringing the smell of morning pipeweed once more. "Take your lead from Eimik and the spotters on the other 2 boats. I think it will be good for the crew to see you at the head of the boat for the first day of our voyage." Yuka knew that she must have looked annoyed. Aglu gave her a wink and patted her shoulder. "A wolf can learn much from the rabbit, even one with a bad leg." Yuka nodded and handed Aglu her traveling pack. "I'll have Eimik join you presently," she called out over her shoulder. All around Yuka, the fierce-looking men of Aglu's crew took their places at the sides of the boats. Near a dozen of them mounted their vessels, while the rest took their places on the other 2. Every man took his oar to one side or another, sitting on the thick salt-stained planks that had been built around the bone of the vessel. Yuka saw the nomad warriors and Salt Sisters mounting the center boat and sitting on the planks towards the back, where Aglu now stood with a massive hand wrapped around the boat's tiller. "On my word, Aglu bellowed for all three boats to hear. A long, pregnant silence followed. Now! The four men at the back of the three vessels shoved hard against the sides. There was a great grinding scrape as the skin and bone of the umyaks broke from the icy shore. All in the boat swayed as the vessel righted itself in the tide. The other four men jumped aboard, and they were off. Steady on. We prefer our spotters facing the front way. Yuka tore her gaze from the side of the beginning voyage to look at the grinning young face of the annoying boy who had just joined her, the one with the one leg. I know this well. This is far from my first time, Yuka lied through her teeth to Eimik. Well then, you will not need a word from me. Eimik leaned on his good leg against the spotter's plank and took a chunk of salted shellfish out of his pocket. After ripping off a bite for himself, he handed a generous hunk to Yuka. She took it, her annoyance of the boy melting a bit as her stomach rumbled loudly. The boat suddenly lurched forward, and Yuka almost fell into Eimik's arms as the vessel below them thrust forward with the first pull of Takani's oarsman. The dark-eyed man himself was barking out time for the oarsman as he rowed in the back, near Aglu at the tiller. Yuka finally turned back towards the horizon. Yuka had lied just then. She had never been to sea, not fully. When she was 10, Aglu had taken her on one of her umyaks through the largest river in the Copper Shards. That had been a 10-day trip, and Yuka had only just glimpsed the mouth of the great cove where the river ended before they had begun the hike back. What she had seen before her left her speechless. Left to right, as far as the sight had reached, there was naught but the black of the sea and the gray and blue of the evening sky. The sun had crossed the black horizon and been swallowed by the sky already. The wind was kicking up from the far north. Now, the memory made Yuka shiver. She knew she was born for the cliffs, the forests, and the tower mountains, not the never-ending sea. Now that she was finally out beyond the icy shores, looking forward, she did not believe she had ever seen so far in her life. Takani! Ati! Aglu called out. Takani repeated the word with a roar, and the oarsmen to the right of the boat ceased rowing. The other men on Takani's side began to row with more gusto. Yuka watched as Aglu heaved the tiller towards her, turning the entire vessel to then run parallel with the shoreline. The other two boats followed suit. How do we fare ahead, young spirits? The large woman called down the boat to Yuka. Remembering her duty, Yuka turned and rose carefully onto the spotter's plank. All before her, in front of the boat, was clear and black. She called out over her shoulder quickly to show that she was capable of her task. All clear, She stopped, her words dying in her throat as Eimik's young voice spoke up over her. Shallow ice, swimming at low depth, an oar's length to the right, Eimik's voice called out. Rock on our path, just below, 20 poles ahead. Yuka felt her annoyance simmer once more as Aglu gave new orders from Eimik's information to Takani. For half a moment, she wanted to throw her salted shellfish back at the boy's head for contradicting her. She was alone for her thoughts for a moment. And would that show you to be a woman, marked and true, or to be a little girl who thinks she knows everything already? Yuka thought hard, and her aunt's comment about the wolf and the rabbit echoed in her mind. I am no fretful little girl, she thought to herself. She looked at the boy next to her. He seemed entirely oblivious to her presence. His eyes looked into the cold, hard wind of the ocean, and did not seem to blink for a moment as he looked for dangers for his crew. He is short a leg, yet what he sees keeps us safe on the sea. Yuka remembered that Eimik was a member of Aglu's crew. Knowing her aunt, there was a very good reason why she put her trust in the young boy. How do you know what is ahead, and what to look for? She spoke amiably, over the loud cry of the sea wind. Eimik glanced at her. Smiling amiably, he pointed ahead. All you need to look for are colors. He pointed ahead. Look at the water. On days like this, it's all one color. A deep slate gray, almost black. If you see anything different, a different shade at all, no matter how slight, you call it out. But how do you know what it is? Eimik thought for a moment. White and blue are almost always ice. The bluer it is, the deeper the ice. If it's near white, it's close enough to the surface to gouge chunks out of our hole. If you see anything blacker than the water around, it means that rock is near the surface, and that's worse than the ice. There's really not much else to look out for. Lurkers don't go this shallow until the sun's fully down. Only fools ride the waves then. Fools and brave brothers. Yuka smiled at the half-grin Eimik gave her. I guess so, he said quietly, turning back towards the water. Here, you try now. Yuka moved back to rest more centered on the spotter plank. She looked far ahead on the water, squinting so as to see any change in color. Blue, white, black. She paused, concentrating. Green? Yuka looked hard at something ahead of them. She motioned for Eimik to look. He leaned forward, but seemed just as perplexed as her. What in the devil's sky is that? Eimik leaned farther over. He took in a breath to call out, but paused as they neared. As he did, the wind changed, bringing with it a stench so foul Yuka almost gagged. The scent. Do you not smell it? The girl hissed through her teeth. Yuka pointed down the way to the left of their boat. As they neared the sickly white and green thing in the water, Eimik strained over the side to look. What approaches? Aglu barked over to them. There, Eimik shouted out. There's something in the water. Something large, something white, green, and dead, Yuka called out. A berg? No, Yuka knew that what she smelled was not salt or ice. She choked as the boat neared it. By the black, that's foul. Eimik's nose scrunched. He nodded to Yuka. The girl turned. Aglu, it's on the left. She raised her hand to indicate the side. Aglu growled a command to Kani, and the dark-eyed man called for a halt from the oarsmen. The vessel slowed to a gentle guide as Yuka turned towards the water. She could see it closer now. It was white, but not like ice. It shimmered a sickly green. It looked altogether more the color of rotted milk. Soon as the scent reached the noses of all around, a murmur went up among the crew. Aglu called out for the other two boats to halt their rowing. The small fleet neared whatever it was floating. The scent of rotted, burnt meat was nauseatingly foul in the air. As their boat reached the floating thing, Yuka looked over the side. Only a lurker, only the gods of the deep, could have a belly that size, from what she saw. From the dead ones Yuka had seen, Yuka knew that the skin of a lurker was black all over, save for their wide, blubbery stomachs. Though the stomach of this god was not entirely white, at the center of his chest, near the head, gaped a massive black, green, and red hole. At the center, the scent emitting from it was enough for Eimik, Yuka, and half of Aglu's crew to lose their morning kelfish over the side of the umyak. Yuka coughed away the last of her breakfast and rose, her stomach cramping. None around spoke as they saw the creature. None knew what to say. All had smelled a dead lurker when it was killed in reverence upon the land. But there was a scent in the air that made no sense to Yuka. It's burnt. The flesh was turned and rotted. She must have been floating dead more than a few days. The light rider spoke these words in a tearful voice. As the tide carried their boat slowly past the creature, Yuka walked back down the boat to keep the meaty, dead hole in her sight. She glimpsed the faces of some of the crew as she passed them. Every one of them, veteran seamen and warriors all, showed fear that can only come from the worst of omens. Yuka reached back towards the end of the boat. She stood next to the light rider as their vessel passed the dead god. What could have done this? The old woman said, her head in her hands. Fire, Yuka said tonelessly. What demon could produce this? She stared at the greenish-black scorch marks around the hole. Death from the sky. And this is the beginning of her journey. The next file will show what happens when they make land.